One of my favorite times of the year is visiting with the commissioner, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Thanks for making the time, Commissioner.
Happy to be here. Thanks for being part of Media Days.
We certainly do appreciate it. And a lot going on, maybe not as hectic as a past couple of Media Days, but one of the things I wanted to get into right from the top, since most of my audience is Tennessee-based, and that is getting that NCAA investigation behind you, and now that everything is done and the SEC is involved in that must be a relief, I would think.
It's always better to be at the end of those experiences than at the beginning. We have an advisory role assigned to us whenever one of our universities is going through one of those processes. I think one of the hard parts that we have to come to grips with in the big picture of the NCAA world is these things just take too long. And part of the penalty that's really not acknowledged is the uncertainty around the program. And it's not simply SEC members that I feel that strongly about the slow pace. But I think globally we need to resolve these things in a more timely manner.
What can be done about that?
Well, I think it's a focus. First, one is that we're going to have very intentional expectations for cooperation and timelines. I think important in the Tennessee case is the role of campus leadership, and the infractions process should be even more supportive, in my view, of campus leaders and the difficult decisions that they have to make in these matters. I do think over time there's been this continuing gathering of working groups and special committees to look at the process, and you generally see a trend of we have to have stronger penalties, we have to have more aggressive penalties. And that's where I would say perhaps you need less aggressive penalties applied in a more timely fashion to strike the right level of oversight and accountability.
That's interesting. How would you grade Tennessee's level of compliance and working with you and the NCAA? Because this goes way back. I can remember being 10 years old and seeing a Sports Illustrated investigation, and the NCAA got involved. But then athletic director Doug Dickey was all about compliance. And that's almost as big of a Tennessee tradition as the checkerboard end zone.
Well, I had the opportunity to work with Doug when he was athletics director still early when I moved to the SEC in 2002, and still have opportunity. Saw him at the Orange Bowl this year. So Doug was an iconic leader. I would go to this circumstance, tremendous credit to Chancellor Plowman, and then member her team at the chancellor's office level initially. The change in leadership at the athletic director and at football coach level is never easy. It's been really encouraging to work with Danny, to watch some of the change he's led. And I know his focus, like you described with Doug Dickey, is on making sure the program operates within the boundaries and expectations of the rules to which we've agreed. And it's an interesting time to deal with issues as we have changes around name, image, and likeness, changes around state laws, but a lot of credit to the campus leadership provided in the modern area that also is a tribute to the work Doug Dickey did back when he led.
There was no bowl ban, but there was a substantial financial penalty. Speaking in generalities, could we see more substantial financial penalties? Might that be the trend?
We've had a financial penalty attached to a postseason ban. That's a conference policy that is decades old. One of the realities that is around this timing of consideration and decision making for the NCAA is there was a constitution committee formed in the summer of 21, and one of the outcomes was that this accountability process, this infractions process, should not penalize uninvolved individuals. And I think that speaks right to the postseason ban, where in a transfer environment, you may have an entirely different roster from year to year. And so you're watching the NCAA adapt to that type of expectation. And one of those resources or tools in the penalty toolbox would be financial penalties. This was new. This was novel. Do I think you'll see more of that approach? I do. But I think the NCAA infractions model is going to have to adapt to some of the modern expectations, and that's really what we're seeing.
I don't know if this is politics or not, but at one point, the Attorney General in the state of Tennessee said that they could possibly sue the NCAA if there were a bowl ban. Is that ever thought of? Is that a real thing, or is that political posturing?
Well, someone who wrote or was involved in writing the letter would be better to comment. My view is you have to allow the administrative process and a voluntary association to work. And one of the problems we have right now with state laws is states are saying in this name, image, and likeness space, they're not actually enforcing their laws. We know of no enforcement action that any state has taken to enforce its own law. And now states are going further, whether it's a letter or through legislation adopted, to say the NCAA or even conferences cannot enforce reasonable name, image, and likeness standards. That is not a long-term viable strategy to support national competition. And so while the NCAA has to change, the state management effort is going to have to adapt too.
So I visited with you this time last year, and I thought the NIL thing would be fixed in a matter of weeks. And I remember you talking about you got the midterm elections coming up, and then the real elections. I'm like, whoa, we're talking about years. And you mentioned that Congress needs to step in and be involved. With all they've got going on, why would they place a priority on placing some sort of universal NIL rule set?
There is, and I acknowledge there's a lot happening. There are economic issues. There's a war in Ukraine. There are, we're seeing military appointments at the center. There are social issues. There's another election coming a year from November. So there is absolutely a lot on the plate of Congress. There's also a reality that the American collegiate athletic system is unique in the world. It is iconic. It draws people in. I've been at games with House members and Senate members, and they look around and say, look at how college athletics brings people together, and we have to protect and support this. And so part of the responsibility that's placed upon Congress is to set federal standards when there is a need. And what I shared Monday is the effort to explain the variety of issues we're facing, and that Congress is the place that can set a clear, uniform national standard around name, image, and likeness activity. I have a responsibility to try to educate and inform our congressional members and leaders about the need for their engagement. The prediction of what will happen is not up to me. It's up to House and Senate leaders and House and Senate members. We traveled about 6 weeks ago, had, I think, even more in-depth conversation. So I'm encouraged about the level of interest. What we need to see is a bill produced by a committee that's considered on either the floor of the House or the Senate that can advance. And that's going to be a continuing work effort.
Talk television contracts, if you can, for a moment. And if you look on the surface, and you know more about the television contracts than I could even pretend to know, but if you look at the deal that the Big Ten got, it looks more lucrative. It looks like perhaps a better deal than what you got with ESPN. What might I be missing?
Well, first of all, there are reports about the revenue access. You actually have to see the revenue access. And you've also seen reports that there may be some challenges around some of the commitments made. I haven't evaluated those. So I actually think the ability to answer that question fully is a backward-looking question. In my time as commissioner since 2015, I walked into 3 different contracts, one with CBS that concludes after this season, one with ESPN for our second level of games. That was originally formed. Both of those contracts date back to 2008, and then an update in 2012 and a network. That's a third contract. The Big Ten had the ability to have shorter term contracts and go to the market at different periods of time than we've had. I think we actually did really well, both financially with our CBS agreement that pivots towards ABC and ESPN. I also know that it's a much more fan-friendly situation where we have the ability next year at media days to announce the majority of our kickoff times, to inform our fans of every early kickoff time for the entire season, rather than waiting for 6 or 12 days. And those are trade-offs. Those are value propositions. We'll continue to work to increase our value. I don't think all these stories are fully written on what broadcast agreements mean, and part of our responsibility is to see how we might be able to grow our visibility, provide quality production and presentation, but also develop revenue opportunities.
You had said at SEC spring meetings you hope to get the schedule worked out. I got the sense towards the end of it that maybe it wasn't the resolution that you wanted in terms of the schedule model. How would you describe that week personally and the challenges that you faced in trying to get everybody on board?
What I thought was we collaborated really well, and that's encouraging to me. Leadership is not dictatorship. Anybody can yell and scream. I think leadership is allowing discussion and debate, disagreement, setting aside some of those disagreements and coming to a common solution. And when you look at the announcement around playing 8 games, I thought that was a healthy outcome for a period of time. And then when you see the reaction to the 8-game matchups, the schedules that were introduced in mid-June, I think there was a wow factor for people as they looked at the strength of schedules overall, the high level of competition, and the huge brands that are coming into our football stadiums. I think all of that's positive. At the end of that process, you have to stop and say, well, we have a 24 schedule. We have to figure out 25. And the discussion about 8 or 9 games will continue. For me personally, I'm probably less invested in a particular number and wanting to make sure we have the right reasons, the right purpose behind our schedule. I think we also want to see the highest level of competition in our football stadiums on a regular basis. And 24, I think, to me, is a healthy start along that, achieving those sets of objectives.
What importance do you place on the rivalries? Because as much as I love Georgia, Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama, at some point, if the SEC continues to grow, those may fall by the wayside. But what importance do you place on them?
Well, setting growth aside, I think they're enormously important. I think that's part of our history. And one of the reasons that we needed to slow down the decision-making process is to allow, with all of the change we've had in leadership positions, people to consider the placement of those rivalries in their schedule. And what we did in 24 is honor the vast majority of those games of passion, if you will. If we stay at 8, I can't do that every year with every one of these long-standing, really high-level games of passion that generate interest. And so the pressure point around 8 or 9 games, one of them is the number of annual games that are played, whether it's going to be 1 or 3. I think the good news, whether we play 8 or 9 games, is the ability for us to have everyone seen. So every team played by every other team within 2-year periods, and then home and away over a 4-year period. So there's health there. The question is going to be, is every one of these long-standing rivalry games annually, or are some of them going to pivot to be an every other year circumstance?
Great stuff. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, as we broadcast live from SEC Media Days in Nashville. We'll be in Dallas next year, but Nashville for now, and that's Greg Sankey.